So we've got three speakers today. We've got Megan Wynn and Brett Pence, who comes from Duluth, and Aaron, who comes from here. And we're going to talk about the immediate response that Ely had a month ago and maybe ongoing. And then more general issues about how a community can set up to be ready should such a thing happen again. And you can be sure, I'm sorry, that it will happen again. And then Aaron, I'm sure, will tie it all together for us.
No,
Okay, so I guess you're going to kick off, right, Aaron?
Yeah, just real quick. Get started. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for being here. I know our last one was canceled because of the smoke and all the activity, but at that time, when the July lightning incident started really unfolding and growing, there was definitely a group of people that were asking, how do we help? How do we help? And quite quickly, Megan and I and several others and Lynn Rose, we're thinking about how we quickly help out. And what I've learned over my years being on incident management teams all over the country, what I do on those incident management teams is a liaison officer. And so I basically come into a community, do very little on the fire line, but the first thing I do is go mostly talk to the sheriff, talk to the mayor, talk to the emergency management, and really figure out how to connect the community to the fire incident management team. And what I said is often what happens is communities are so generous that they can really overwhelm the incident management team with Gatorade and water. And I had a fire where a firefighter said they needed socks, and we got a semi-load of socks. And so there isn't always a connection between like the actual need and the specific needs. So that's what we talked about really early on, is how can we take that workload off of the incident management team so they can focus on the fire. But when the incident management team gets here, there's somebody or a group that they can just plug into immediately. And so that's what we did. Very quickly kind of burned the midnight oil, and thanks to the State Theater and others, we're able to stand that up in 24 hours basically. So
can you tell us how the incident management team is created and how does it get here? Who calls it? Who are they?
Sure. Yeah, so in my former role as the district ranger, like if you go back to 2025, and I am rostered on actually 2 incident management teams. There's different size teams, like small to very large. And then so they're constantly nationwide. There's about 29 teams that are always in some stage of being ready to go. And those are the big teams. And then within the state, there's smaller teams. So Minnesota has 3 small teams. They're called type 3 teams. And so they're usually, at least one of those teams is rostered and ready to go. And so what happens is the agency administrator, so like the Forest Service in this case, sees that the fire has exceeded the local capacity to put that fire out. And then they kind of make the order. It's about $1 million phone call just to say, come on out. And then what happens is it takes, depending on the team, 24 to 48 hours for them to get here. And then when they get here, they plug in, and it takes usually about another 24 hours for them to really get their feet under them and get established. And while all that's happening, while that's in motion, the local area is managing the fire. Thanks. Good question.
Yeah, so Aaron and I had a conversation Tuesday. Emily Rose texted me Tuesday night And then we were at Northern Grounds with a group of about 5 or 6 of us the next morning at 9 a.m. I think we met initially for 3 hours trying to make a plan, and then we were in the State Theater, I think by noon, ready to go, like just got our posters printed out, started putting our systems in place, and then yeah, it's being open to the public as either a community space where people could come in or if they needed resources. And some of the systems that we initially put in place were, you know, if you're on What's Up Ely, you probably saw hundreds of offers coming in, and there wasn't like one place to kind of collect all of that. You know, it's like you either saw it or you didn't. So we decided to put together a form that you could either intake information of what people are offering. So it could be a place to stay. We saw horse boarding. We saw people offering to drive pets to Duluth. We saw donations of N95 masks and air purifiers and things like that. So we had a form that could intake that information and go into a database. And then we also had that form could also take in needs. So if we had a need came in, we had a database that we could just plug and play. And we usually were trying to meet those needs within less than an hour, which was the average timeline for that. And a lot of the needs that we saw in that first week, I think we had about 3 or 4 housing opportunities that we were able to match up for people who are living in Ely or surrounding evacuated areas. So we were able to do that. We coordinated other like evacuation rides. So if someone did get evacuated, they would have someone be able to come pick them up or pick their pets up, or if people were going out of town, kind of facilitate if someone could go grab something for them. I helped move some canoes out from one of the bases. So yeah, the first week was just like trying to get organized of like, okay, this is what people are offering, because we don't need people going and donating 40 cases of Gatorade. We can kind of try to take some of these generous offers and like put it in the right places. We're not also creating excess and waste. Because that was something, yeah, it's like someone's like, can I go buy like 1,000 N95 masks? And I was like, well, there's only 3,000 people in Ely. Maybe, but like let's slow our roll a little bit. So we were just making sure that there was a need that could be filled, so we weren't just collecting things that we didn't really have homes for, or we still have 595 masks at this moment. So we're ready if another smoky day comes up. That was something else that we did was we're kind of an information hub as well, so we had some of the local Firewise representatives come out and man their own table. So they had resources for how to make sure your home was up to the standard for like Firewise recommendations, or make sure you had an evacuation plan, like what you should pack, things like that. We also had like some health related information. So like here's how to properly wear an N95 mask, or if it's 100 degrees and you can't have your windows open, like here's a Corsi Rosenthal method, like DIY air purifier. And then we had people actually donate physical air purifiers. So we were trying to identify needs in the community of like who's the most vulnerable, you know, like should we go to the nursing homes and see if there's needs there. We had some people knocking on doors, just checking out with people who aren't online, maybe not going into town and seeing our posters, or maybe don't have a cell phone, which came up. So we had to have someone physically go knock on a door just to make sure that person had everything that they needed. So there's quite a range of offers, but like, and then the needs were very specific. And so after that first immediate week, we also pivoted to like trying to connect, because we kind of joked like we're a bunch of people who like know a guy or know a gal, and so like if something has come up like, oh, I need a mechanic, like Emily Rose would be like, oh, I got this guy on speed dial, like let me give him their number, or like, oh, these people need just to go get like 20 things of toothpaste for Morris Ball Lake Township's fire department. So it's like, okay, this person's gonna go get the toothpaste. And so we all kind of like had our connections, which was really helpful in this. Like I think it would be hard for say it like any kind of organization or agency just go into a place where they don't know people. Like the neighborliness was like probably the most critical part of this. Is like we all knew people that had the resources, had a connection, you know, like I think someone in the incident management team called us and was like where's a property up top of a hill that we could put this like cell phone tower for communication? And then we looked at a map and it's like, oh, so and so knows this person who's on that land, or like let's give them a call. So it's like it really does help being so interwoven in the community and knowing your neighbors and knowing what resources are available. Also being able to like identify gaps and being like, oh, this is one that we could fill, but we also don't want to step on the toes of nonprofits that exist. So like food shelf, we have a food shelf. Let's see if we can give donations there versus taking in food ourselves or things like that. So yeah, so the first few weeks was really just trying to get organized, connecting the dots, connecting people. And then as that started, like the wilderness started opening up, evacuations were being lifted. We kind of pulled back a little bit and be like, okay, what are the needs right now? Okay, it sounds like businesses really need support. So the last 2 weeks, we've been working with University of Minnesota Extension to put together a survey for businesses. So we're trying to figure out what losses happened in July, like what's needed right now. Can we get a special session for economic relief? And while the peacetime emergency order wasn't extended, which makes it harder to get a special session going, we're still trying to put the pressure on. So we have the survey going right now. NMW has a sign-on letter that businesses can sign on to. So the first week, I think 82 businesses signed on. We sent that to the governor and other state legislators. And then now we're trying to get more people to sign on to that just so we can show like strength in numbers and strength in data as well. So we can be like, hey, like 30 businesses lost more than 25% of revenue in July. Like that's a pretty big hit for businesses who only operate in the summer and then are shut down in the winter. So we're really trying to just get the numbers in front of us, get the support from businesses and other community groups to show like, hey, like we still need the support. We need you to either be thinking about us now or when you go back to session in January. And then also just trying to get the message out that Ely is open and like you can come back. It's not smoky anymore. Like a lot of the wilderness has opened up. Like come spend your money here. And that message actually has been resonating quite well lately, as far from what we've heard. So I couldn't get into the boathouse without a 30-minute wait on Saturday. So I was like, people are so back. So, but businesses are still hurting. And I was just talking to Ellie Paragas because I was doing a thing with her, and yeah, she was just saying like, we're not where we need to be right now, and I'm sure other businesses feel the same. So that's kind of our current view is on supporting businesses, and then we're kind of starting to think about the future of like, okay, what if this does happen again? What if there is another fire this summer that's massive, or what if we have a flood in next spring that takes out some significant infrastructure, leaves people not being able to go back to their homes. And so we're kind of just trying to figure out how to put some infrastructure in place so that like if a big thing happens, it doesn't have to be the 3 to 10 of us stepping in and doing it all ourselves again, but anyone can step in, look at what we did before, see what worked well, see what we could improve on. So that's kind of the phase that we're in right now, is like just looking back a little bit, seeing what went well, and then trying to figure out plans for the future, especially since we're in the climate group. Like we know things are shifting. We know it could be a big El Nino year. So we're trying to think of like what could be the implications of that. If we have a big drought this winter and we get no snow, like how is that going to affect our winter businesses? Like how could we apply this model to them? So really trying to figure out like, yeah, what can we do next? Does it make sense for us to still be a community group? Do we pivot to being nonprofit, which we're not totally sold on yet, but yeah, so that's kind of the grand scheme of how the last month of our lives has kind of gone.
Why the State Theater? How did you choose it?
Well, no,
I was at a theater conference in Indiana. I'm
Yeah.
Dave Casey, for people that know me. I'm the director of the theater. When I first found out and looked at my phone saying, oh my gosh, there's fires in Ely. I put a hold on the conference and I was on the phone all afternoon. So the first call I made was to our board chair saying, we're going to open up the theater for whatever the community needs. And I had no idea, you know, and then I called, I don't know if Emily called me or I called her.
She called you because we saw that you posted that you were open to the public, and we're like,
Yeah.
well, they're already open to the public.
So
Let's see if we can put ourselves in there.
then I made a phone call to the person that was left at the theater who was managing it, saying, you're going to get an influx of people here. So that was like the backstory behind it.
Wow.
Well, and
Thank you.
yeah,
But I mean, we've got that third space area, and it's really want to make it sort of a community space. And this was a wonderful service that we could do.
Yeah, and I think in our decision making too, it like made a lot of sense location wise for
Yeah.
you guys. We're like center of town. We could put things up on the marquee if we
Yeah.
needed to. We had like space of those windows people could kind of see in and be like, oh, there's something going on. Oh, like, oh, I see that they have masks. Like, I'll go in there. So I think it was the perfect location for what we were trying to do at that time. Which was great.
And my other quick question is, are you all volunteers? Did you have any money to spend? Did you need money?
Your
to
own
spend?
money to spend. Well, kind of. I'll clarify it this way. So because we were just a group of community members, we're not a 501c3 nonprofit, we're not a business. We had some fiscal sponsors, but more that we were like people wanted to give us money and we're like, no, give it to the Morris Valley Fire Department or give it to Northwoods Partners or the food shelf. So we were trying to spread the money not to us because we didn't have the infrastructure to take it in. And then also just like, yeah, just wanted, like, we didn't need more resources because people were willing to donate. So it was all volunteer time. My employer gave me the week to be able to focus on this, which was really generous of them. I'm very thankful. Emily Rose, I think, did a little bit of that and took some PTO. Bria was sometimes working in the emergency room on this. But, maybe I shouldn't have said that publicly, but like was all volunteer on her own time. So yeah, I think the first 5 days we each put in 100 hours each, just a volunteer, like in the theater every day, like on our spreadsheets, like trying to figure things out, trying to get accurate information out. We had a Substack that we started, which is kind of like a blog platform, but people can like sign up to get email updates. So an update would go right to their email, which is like a great system because things were constantly changing on the fly. So having a website didn't quite make sense. That was more static. We wanted something that can continue to evolve. So yeah, and then a lot of people were like, how can we support businesses? So we created like a full business list, which we're still adding to. Not all businesses are on the chamber website or on other websites. So it's one of those dynamic things where we're just constantly adjusting and constantly adding and trying to make sure everyone's feeling supported and comfortable and things like that. But yeah, to summarize, all volunteer.
This question is to all three of you, but is this normal to have a group to sort of form, or is okay? So we should have. Okay, thank you. So we should.
I can elaborate.
So we should have something more formal in place that we call upon no matter what the disaster, right?
Yes and no and yes. So I feel like we all had the time and the resources, and there's definitely people who are probably more qualified, maybe step into that volunteer role, but like we're out of town or not available or have to do full-time jobs or other things. So like I think it's like whoever's available to step in should step in.
Mhm.
And sometimes the nonprofits themselves are like busy taking care of their own constituencies or members or whatever. So and I'll answer it doesn't fully exist because we had multiple agencies, people being like, wow, we've never actually seen it. We've worked on this many fires and we haven't seen anything specifically like this.
Yeah.
So we're pretty unique in that. And I also think that is something that's unique to Ely because we are so community driven, and like that really just showed in that moment of people like stepping out and like people you might not agree with on their politics or their views or whatever, like coming in and having a really nice conversation and figuring out how we can both support each other. So yeah, it was very unique to Ely in this moment, I think, as well. Kind of just like a perfect thing that came out of a situation.
Okay, let's hear from Brett.
Sorry.
How does all that relate to this handout?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, hi. I am Brett Pence. I'm from Duluth, as was mentioned. I work for Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's one of many state interfaith power and lights around the country. We formed as a national organization 25 years ago, working on the issue of climate change with faith communities. And that thought it was just going to be a one-time thing in Berkeley, California, and exploded around the country across all different faiths. And it's proven a very resilient model of working within that space. Our statewide organization is about 20 years old. I was volunteering in my church in Duluth, and we got together and wanted to work on climate change, and we found a bunch of other congregations in our area, not just in Duluth, but in the Arrowhead. And then we came into Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light as our regional subgroup of that. So, and then I eventually started working for them. So I've been with them for about 10 years now. The group works in kind of three buckets. So they work on organizing education within faith communities and within the communities faith communities are in, right? Within those larger subsets on the issue of climate change. So that's sort of like core organizing, you might say. There is also a bunch of work on policy, like how do you teach people how to get involved in policy? How do you talk to a legislator? How do you communicate an issue with your city government? How do you actually get involved at the Public Utilities Commission? So there's that subset of work. And then there's a third bucket of how we do things. Bear with me. Well, to connect all this to Ely here. The third bucket is practical. And I think that's a little unusual. Usually you would have a nonprofit that could work on organizing policy. But then we also work on, okay, well, if a church really wants to take like physical action and they want to reduce their carbon footprint in their church, how do they do that? So we had to get involved. Well, one thing they could do is solar. One thing you could do is energy efficiency. One thing you could do was, urban gardens or rural gardens. So we got involved in these kind of practical projects kind of early, and they kind of feed on each other. If you know, like how the problems a church is trying to put solar in a building, you can really effectively communicate with the legislator about, hey, these are some of the changes we'd like to see. So this asset could help us with. So that's how we've operated. How we do that, in a connected way, it changes over time. I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, this idea of resiliency has bubbled up. It is bubbled up's not the right word. It has exploded like a volcano. And that the realization that we live in a changed, we're living in climate change at the moment. It is a changed climate that we're all experiencing, it's impacting all of us. It's powerful for me to say that in this place, because I know you have gone through this, you're going through it. So, but this was coming from many of our core constituencies, mainly faith institutions. Like they were impacted. We were just mentioning that you had faith communities step up for you during this incident. And I think one of the things we're getting from them is we want to understand how we can help our communities in a different way. And also these are communities that are in a different, oftentimes their membership's going away. They're trying to reimagine how they actually interact with community, how they attract new people. So this idea of community resilience hubs kind of percolated up. So we've worked on a kind of a teaching webinar about resiliency within those those communities, and also in the communities those faith communities live in, right? So it can't be cities, can't be city community centers, can't be other things. But we work on a kind of educational series. Then last year we took our first group of 10 organizations in the state that each distinctly wanted to be a community resilience hub. And we're trying to do that. That was really successful. And we're like, you know what? We're going to do that every year. Try to get 10 to 20 organizations, educate them over a 10-month period, talk to them about what is a hub? It's discrete. In our view, it's a discrete physical asset somewhere. What is the community? That's a big conversation. Oftentimes a church, for instance, thinks they know their community, but they don't. They might not know their neighborhood, but they have a different congregation, or they might know their neighborhood, but they might not know their broader connections to the community. So and then there's the resilience part. What does that mean for them? And sometimes that's connecting them to some of the larger assets you were talking about. What is emergency response? How do we connect people to that? What could be our role? And so at the end of that, they're supposed to come out with a plan, okay, this is who we are. This is how we can operate, within a certain number of emergencies or type of emergencies. This is what we could give to our community. And this is how we could reach out, be helpful, right? And then our goal within that is not just to walk through them, but also get them the assets. And oftentimes that means money. You might have a plan, but that plan might mean a battery backup in your building, and that can be expensive. So let's figure out, our job should be to help them figure out what are the grants and other things that we can help them through to get those assets. So one quick example, and then I want to listen because I'm here to learn too from your great community. But in Duluth, at the same time where all this was happening, this great work was occurring. You probably know air quality was bad all over the North Country, And I remember flying out of the airport and the air quality index was 1350, right? And so it was terrible, terrible. And as you know, most of our buildings are built on the assumption that they're ventilated from outdoor air that we assume is clean. That is how we clean our air. So we had all kinds of problems in Duluth, as we did all of the Northland on this issue. One of the communities that went through our training that ended in May of this year was the Unitarian Church in Duluth, right? And one of the things that they picked out we had 3 Northland groups, and they all picked this out as like, we know fires are coming. We have already experienced terrible air quality 3 or 4 years in a row. and we have to do something about it. So this church, that was part of their plan, was to create a clean air room, a refuge that people could kind of, the community, their congregation, but also their neighborhood could come in and, take a break, maybe get some of these, these services, but more like you could just come in here and take a break. You can charge your phone, you can rest, if your house is hot because you don't have air conditioning, come in here and take a break. Well, they were going to tell on their day of the service about, they had a service on Sunday, and they were going to tell their community, their congregation about their plan and about this asset that was going to be turned on in a few days. But that was the Sunday. It was still so bad, they were going to cancel service, right? The irony, of course, the irony of that. And I think you can look at that as the irony, but you can also look at what happened. And what happened was they had already talked through the issue. They had already understood that this was going to be a problem. And so they looked at it in their congregation and said, you know what? We know enough to know our air quality in the building is way better. Because we're not perfect, but they did have filters in place. They had studied it over the course of 10 months. They're like, our air quality is probably better than most the indoor air in most people's homes. It would be beneficial to get people to service and get them in here. And then they also have a preschool. And they said, well, the preschool is going to cancel. Like, you can use our entire sanctuary so the kids can run around there instead of outside. So they had, to me, that is a good story of what can happen if you think through ahead of time. Because in a crisis, you're just dealing. This is actually not normal to have a fantastic community that just comes together immediately, has an asset like the State Theater that just jumps in and ready to go. Everyone often steps up, but you don't often have this kind of organization. And I think what can happen is if you plan ahead, talk through things, then you can kind of, in the moment, you can say, okay, yes, we're in crisis, but kind of thought about this. Can we what is the next thing we can do? So that's where we want to take communities, different types of communities, these kind of resilience of network that we're trying to build. So I'll stop there. I probably talked enough. So, yeah, but I'm here to learn, and I thank you for this community. Is a great example. I had a great tour of town today, and I continue to be in awe of your resilience of this particular community. So thank you, Jan.
Now we need to talk.
Frederica, I have a question, or actually some comments. First of all, I want to say what I find very beautiful about all four of you, what you did. You live in reality, okay? Reality, current, emergencies, the future in your thinking. And I thank you for that, because not everyone does that. The second thing is you believe in community. Everything you've said in response, and I could go in details on that, but I want to get to the third one, which to me is value. I can tell in your voices and what you've talked about is your value is serving the whole community. Okay. And that's wonderful, and that's change. And I'm thinking of that, and what you did and what you do is that you're not stuck in rigid systems. And I'm saying that because, I'm political and the city government, whatnot, where I saw and witnessed Tuesday when the ashes fell, and prior to that, is the rigidity of government, and it happens to be that way, and you're not. You were flexible. And what I'd say on the rigidity in government was when I noticed the ash falling, I made some contacts with people, new people, within the city government. And it was like, oh, we don't have to worry in Ely. Okay, they're not burning ashes. And we won't do anything. And we'll talk about this next week when we'll put it on the agenda for city council. That wasn't acceptable to me. And then what do I find out afterwards? I'm talking, all of a sudden, here's this Ely community response group form, like that, dealing with it. Go back to the rigidity of government. And it's also in terms of when you're thinking about the systems in the future. Number one, in the city, and I looked at it again and again, and power outages and whatnot, where is stuff placed on the city webpage? Okay, and I don't do Facebook, a lot of people don't do Facebook, but important announcements are not sticking right out there. You're distracted with other things. So basically that in what happened before the community response and before I started calling people about ashes when the fire started, because I was concerned, is I looked at the city emergency webpage and I didn't, I do my blog and I didn't post and tell everyone, but I looked at their webpage and I was involved with the open communications group. Adam Bisbee had it, and we met with the city and others and got the city to start working faster on emergency plan. Okay, and so at that period of time, they posted there were 3 links for people to go to on the website if you look at the emergency thing. And I went on those. 2 of the 3 weren't functioning and a few other things. And I did write the city directly and they changed it over real quick. And so basically, if you could continue with checking what is posted officially on the city and working with them. And the last thing is I want to thank you for actually being concerned about everyone, every single person, because for me, I'm not part of the old guard, but setting that up, that you cared about me, that's it. So
I want
thank
to
you.
make one comment to that too, is with our work, like, her guidance, basically somebody at the table, like only thinking 72 hours ahead was so helpful because you don't know what's gonna change at any one time. The winds could literally change and the fire could move towards town, they can move away. This could be an evac, this could not be an evac, like you just don't know what's gonna happen. So you can only also like plan for so much, so it's like, okay, should we spend our next 72 hours planning for an in-town evacuation, which is more complicated, or do we just, well, we know what we know, and like, let's just respond to that for the next 72 hours. So I think there is a level of flexibility that we could do that government or other agencies or other nonprofits didn't have the capacity, or like were bound by rules and other bureaucratic stuff. So that was like a benefit of just only think about the now and then be flexible if something does change. So that was just.
Maggie has a question.
Yeah, it's a 2-parter. Maybe the first part is for anyone, and the second part is maybe more directed at Brett. It's just about the relationship between emergency, rapid crisis response, and resiliency. Like, how do you all see that? Is it a Venn diagram? Is it a trajectory? And then the second is assuming that there's something beyond emergency crisis response. In thinking about resiliency, what are sort of like the buckets of things to be thinking about and planning for?
Maybe this builds off what Frederica was saying is if you look at the history of fire in Ely, the recent history, like let's go back to Pagami, right? I think that's when Ely really was like, oh my gosh, this is big. It's in our backyard. And then the very next year was the Highway 1 fire, where parts of Ely were getting evacuated like same day within basically an hour of that fire starting. And then in 2021, the fires we had in 2021, starting out at the Delta Lake fire out at the end of the Fernberg, the team that showed up, the first thing we did was sat down with Lake County, St. Louis County, and Ely, and said all of the evacuation plans need to be exactly the same. And that's what we did. That's where the Ready, Set, Go came from. And then during the Greenwood fire, the 911 system was overwhelmed. And that's where we transitioned to the online evacuation map that has the Ready, Set, Go, where you can type in your address. And in 2025, that system was overwhelmed. The servers had 3 million hits and it overwhelmed. So you can see where we're at now, right? We're really going from that initial emergency response, like we seem to have systems set up for that. Now we're transitioning or expanding that into, okay, so the fire's here, we're reacting. Now, how do we build a deeper base to have these other systems for that long-term resiliency? So I think it's exactly what Frederica's saying is it's a trajectory, right? And each fire season we have here, each fire incident, we just get better and better and better. We learn from it, we grow, we integrate that, we build the system, and then. Well, what would be nice is how do we start looking ahead and having things ready before we need them? Like, if we could get to that point, then we're in a much better place. And
Aaron, could I use you to segue into some of the resiliency stuff related to fire hazard reduction?
well, maybe Maggie had a second part to her question.
Oh, okay.
So
I think we'll segue back to
Okay.
your question, but
Okay.
but our, like I still think we're all really focused on like emergency response and planning for emergency response, but also like, are there other things to the concept of resiliency that as we have the space to think about it, we should be thinking about?
I might just add before you flip over to just to that point is that we just think, and the way we're thinking about it, we just think when there is a crisis, there is grassroots response, and we see what happened here, right? And if you can think about grassroots response in discrete communities ahead of time, you can make that response even better, more so. So that's our only thought, except that when we brought that model forward, how emergency response is perceived in certain areas, it then looks at that in different ways. So in Hennepin County, in St. Paul area, they really like that model. So if a church is like, you know what, we're really interested in being a warming center for the winter, and we're actually gonna have some backup power, they want to integrate that church into their networks in different ways. When we brought up that model in St. Louis County, they're like, oh, have you had your battery inspected? Because it might burn down your building. Well, we already got through the inspection process. We're fine, really. But they didn't think of that as an asset. They thought that as a liability. And so I think we have a ways to go in terms of connecting like EMS services to community response in some ways. And we think that kind of looking at smaller communities and kind of like churches or like a community center that maybe is serving a certain population and doing some education there ahead of time can be helpful to bridge those kind of gaps. That's kind of what we're thinking in this.
And just on that too, is like one aspect of the fire, like where the fires kicked up was the heat and like the amount of people in town or out of town that just also didn't have a cool home to be in. Like even if it was that the fires didn't exist, just like places for people to go when it's hot, just for their own health or care. Like that's an aspect of resiliency that I'm thinking about. Is like, do we have a map of all the cool places in town that you can hang out if you can't be in your own house, especially as we're getting hotter and more dry and things like that. So
Cool as in temperature. Yeah.
cool, yeah.
Art Deco's cool too.
Conditioned and just like making sure that air conditioning also can filter out smoke, because that was something that was nice about the theater. Is that like it was cool, people could go in there and have a safer space.
and it was
And it was.
I know in Duluth during this very episode we're talking about here just recently, their emergency protocols don't include cooling centers, nor do they include air quality. And so that's just a gap. And as you say, we're learning, each incident we'll continue to learn, but the DEC center opened, the big convention center opened as a cooling center in spite of, all of that. It was just sort of city, people in the government, like, we really need to do it because we have people passing out in their homes because we don't have air conditioning. And we, especially in Duluth, we don't think of needing cooling. You have to have it 4 trillion gallon air conditioner that is warming up. So we need to think about that more. So it is, to your point, that's incredibly important. Yeah.
I think maybe one last point of that is, so emergency management in the long history is like, we're really good. The disaster is happening now, and Homeland Security built us for that. We have radios and cops and fire trucks and dispatch centers. And so we're really good at that. And I think we started growing into like preparedness, like I was saying about these evacuation plans and testing those during the off season and doing some sand table exercises. But we're missing that third piece, which is the post-disaster response. And I think that's where resiliency coordinators fit in. And you just look at, throughout St. Louis County, even the floods in Cook, we're still recovering from that. We're still recovering from the Brimson, Camp House, Jenkins Creek fires, right? There's plenty of work for a person to be resiliency coordinator. And to me, it seems like it fits well in that emergency management department. But so then you have your before, during, and after disaster, and you have them all kind of working together. But there's plenty of work in that program for a post-disaster recovery.
The recovery period is, you guys are in the middle of, you're sort of remaining in crisis. It seems, from what I've heard today, you tell me if I'm wrong, that you're still in an active threat.
Yeah.
But you're in an active you're in a recovery period too, with an economic crisis you're talking. So there's that period of recovery.
Yeah, and I think that's where the frustration really comes in, because when there's smoke and fire, the media's here, the governor's here, everybody's committed, and then that goes away and everybody goes back to like status quo. And then you're left with the community with no organization to keep moving through that. Like down in the Camp House fire, I was just there this weekend, and like they still need dumpsters, they still need septic systems, they still need trees removed, they still need building permits, but there's no like, hey, on Saturday there's going to be a community meeting and a briefing, and the commissioner is going to be there, and so that's where you still need that organization, you still need that incident management response to keep going, but there's not a team that's here to do that. So that community coordinator, resiliency coordinator, can kind of keep that system going, and it might be years.
Okay, so.
So, during the disaster, after the disaster, before the disaster. So my stick is before the disaster. I got good news and bad news about fire hazard reduction. I just read in the paper that the Forest Service got their Doge cut for their local big fire hazard reduction effort. So I also just learned at a soil and water meeting that NRCS got their fire hazard reduction money cut from 2 million regionally to 200,000, went down to 10% of what it was. So this money was going to help landowners with their forestry projects, mostly for fire hazard reduction. And I don't know if that's what you call a Doge cut, but that just got hit too. Last year, there were 75 approximately landowners in Lake County that got help with their forest management through the federal government or through soil and water. This year, the federal part got cut to zero. There were 60 applications, there were 0 approved. The same thing happened in St. Louis County. So this is part of our federal partners, and they got hit too. I don't know if it's a temporary hit or a permanent hit, but the more I think about it, the angrier I get. So all I can say is, if you want to speak about legislators, you should talk about fire hazard reduction. And one of the big things about fire hazard reduction that we should learn to talk about is our prescribed fire efforts, fire mitigation, emergency mitigation. How do we lessen the disaster, lessen the emergency? We know how to do it. It's not being done. The state's not helping enough. Now the feds just got cut. So that's my speech.
Ramping off Doug's very good point on grants. I hear that sometimes we can solve our own problems through collaborative work in community and creating resilience by burning our own balsams. Do you have any thoughts on perhaps fixing this problem, people power as opposed to federal grants? I don't know. I feel like we're waiting for adequate grant money from the federal government, we're all gonna burn to death, so we.
Well,
gotta
I
come up with
wish it
something.
helps. There were 300 active grants in Lake County alone
Yeah.
last year. And it's just gonna go down to zero.
I know, but we gotta do something in the meantime.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
maybe I
yes.
could chip in here, Barb, and
Yeah.
help bring some clarity. Just with that experience, lots of experience. Shout out to One More Tree. Search up those links, but you know, this is what really motivated me, and I'll take just a moment to continue my adventure in life from the Forest Service to running for the Minnesota House, is that cohesive strategy, like looking at it really comprehensively. And, you know, after we got started with the community response group, I just was very fortunate to, because of where I'm at, make some connections with elected officials. We had a slew of them come through here, like the governor, but Sarah Stroman with the DNR, the state fire marshal. There was a lot of people. Even Keith Ellison came through, and Zach Stevenson, who's the Speaker of the House. We met over in Two Harbors, and I was tasked with putting together a plan. And I did put together a 10-point plan because 10 sounded like a good number. But all of these concepts that you're talking about, but our insurance, the insurance on our homes, and Hudson and I had a fantastic conversation one morning about how do you incentivize like some of the private sector to do the work. So how can you get a lower insurance premium if you do the work ahead of time, and then basically that pays for the work you're doing, right? So there's all sorts of things to do that. It's not just grant money. Like we cannot solely rely on grant money. But the work that was supposed to be done, I was trying to explain this over and over, like prevention. It's like, no, they would not have stopped these fires. They might have kept them jumping the Echo Trail, maybe, right? There's a lot of what ifs. However, today on my to-do list was clean the gutters. And I was cleaning the gutters today, and it really snapped for me that you don't clean the gutters when it's raining. You clean the gutters before it rains. And that's what you do with fire breaks. That's what you do with Firewise. That's when you put your sprinkler system up. You do it before the fires, right? And the other thing you think about, and what we did with the Forest Service here, is we looked at the whole landscape. We used science, and we looked at where the biggest risk was. And risk is the probability of something happening and how bad that thing is going to be. And when you look at risk, like really kind of north of Ely was the highest risk for a long time. We did a lot of work north of town. Then we really kind of moved over to the Fernberg and started the planning process, because as we reduce risk north of town, relatively the risk on the Fernberg started going up. So now that's the next highest priority, right? So science kind of worked, that we predicted the biggest risk to be up on the Echo Trail. And guess what? That's where the fire was. Coincidence? Maybe. Science? Probably. But now really like how to shift that work. And the second part of that is no single agency or no single landowner can solve the problem alone. And so what we did here, every year we met Lake County, St. Louis County, Ely, private landowners, DNR, and the Forest Service met. And we hired a couple people. So many of you know Kes Ebbs with the Nature Conservancy. So he's working one-on-one with landowners. And then Teresa Floberg is really coordinating with the agencies to bring it together at a landscape level. That we're not working at little individual pieces, right? We're looking at it strategically. And what I always tasked them with was shut the layers off, right? So we're always looking at maps. We love maps, right? And I said, turn the land ownership layer off. Don't look at landowners. Don't look at imaginary political lines on the map. Look at this ecosystem. Look at this forest as a whole. Where are the problems? Okay, draw a circle around that problem. Now turn the land ownership layer back on, and that you just identified who needs to work together. And I think if we do that as a community, and resiliency is that next step, draw that boundary, like, okay, these people kind of congregate together, now turn on the layers. Oh, here's churches, here's businesses, here's
Community centers, I should.
yeah, all sorts of things. And then you figure out this is the network that we need to bring together, and then this is the outcome. So thanks, Doug. Good question.
And just from the response team perspective too, something that a lot of people don't know, and I don't know if we've said explicitly, but like Firewise evaluations are free. Like you can call Cass, he'll come to your property and he'll tell you what's up. And I've had a few people come in being like, well, we had Firewise team out and we did everything that we did to create defensible space, but my neighbor doesn't want to cut their balsams and we've yelled at them 100 times. And the thing I think I found is like, yeah, when you yell at your neighbor, that message doesn't go across. So the one thing I offered that person was like, you should be like, hey, I'm getting a Firewise evaluation. Do you want them to look at your property at the same time just to see and have someone more official tell them to cut their balsams? Might help. So I think it is like a neighbors helping neighbors thing, like have those conversations. Like a lot of people, like I said, didn't know that what Firewise was before this whole thing came up. So like, yeah, just talk to people, keep bringing it up. Like it's, yeah, word of mouth is like the most powerful, and just being slightly encouraging is good too.
Direct response to that, I just think it's the most delightful fact that Timo, who retired from the Forest Service, lives next to a property that is not Firewise, and it's his sister-in-law, and she will not Firewise, and he tells her about it all the time. So you can't. So my question was, Brett, have any of the resilience hubs thought about or proposed or put in place a tool library? I feel like in Ely, we need a tool library that was identified years ago, and we've never been able to make it happen. And people can really fix their house or cut down their balsams or whatever if they have access to tools. And if they don't have those things, they won't do those things. So is that something that sort of has come up in those discussions or not?
Not yet, but it's a great idea. And the other thing that what has happened is you get a class of these 10 organizations. You know, we had 3 from the Duluth area, we had 7 or 8 from the Twin Cities, and a few other outlying areas in Minnesota. And as they work together, you know, they graduate, but it's not like they are totally unconnected. Like now they're connected into a system, and we can see, oh, this could be an interesting network. So the 3 organizations, the Unitarian Church, Gloria Dei, Lutheran, and American Indian Community Housing Organization that went through it, they talked to each other. Like during the smoke crisis, they were talking to each other. So you can see how networking, building a discrete tool library like in Duluth for them to use in the moment could be a good thing. So our hope is that as we continue on this, we build a network, and the network looks for opportunities like something like that, or even like communication networks and things like that. So
The one thing I'll add to that too is something that we saw is like some people can't, or like, yeah, like different tree services or other like clearing, like that people either can't afford it or it's not accessible to them, or they just weren't available for weeks on end. And so we were trying to like pair like outfitting staff who were like laid off to be able to like go out there. But then there's also insurance issues and like training how to use chainsaws, and that was like a barrier. So we weren't able to successfully do that. So if there is some kind of like community like support for helping people on their property, I don't know how to create something like that exists that fits within the legal and the insurance part, but that's something that we are interested in the future. So yeah.
Back when Aaron was the Wishwe District Ranger, I tried to talk him out of burning some brush piles on the on the Domich Road. Hudson's earlier question prompted. So I have ongoing debates with friends about whether when you clear your balsam furnace, which we've done, it's better to burn them or better to leave them on the ground. What's the answer to that from a fire risk perspective as opposed to the ecological perspective? Wow, Aaron said, as long as the piles on the Domich Road, Aaron said he had to burn.
Yep, absolutely. Boy,
Not to be on the spot or anything.
That's okay.
it's hard not to go back to the glaciers and start the answer. Like seriously, we have so vastly altered the natural cycle, right? And had we been here 200 years ago, our forests were remarkably thinner than they are right now. And they were so much more productive. There was probably more people living here then than there are now. And there was a lot of forest management going on by the Ojibwe, some of the best forest management we've ever had. That produced all those white pines, and there was a lot of burning going.
Yeah, but they didn't have brush piles. I'm talking about brush piles.
But they didn't have brush piles because they burned all the
Exactly,
time.
exactly.
And so if you think about tons per acre, like, let's just say hypothetically, there's maybe 25 tons per acre. And now we're thousands of tons per acre. And so we have so much interrupted the cycle. It's so hard to say, my personal choice, I burn them. I reduce that fuel load. And it really opens up the forest floor for other species or beings from the Ojibwe perspective. And I know we've talked about this a lot, is markets, right? So I'm always looking for a secondary use of that carbon. And mostly at my house, it goes into my wood stove. And then I'm not using propane.
Yeah, but the brush piles are good habitat, and you aren't releasing the carbon immediately like you do when you burn the brush pile.
Yeah.
I'll speak to it, Aaron.
Yeah.
So your brush pile will produce a particular amount of carbon. What if a forest fire comes? How much carbon is being
That's
released
the
then?
question. That's
Yeah.
right. That's the question I'm
And
asking.
Well, I think further research would really make sense because
So I'll throw it out there.
you know.
Yeah, I'll throw it out there, and
Yeah.
I probably won't do the research to find you the links right now. Yale Forestry School has some fantastic podcasts, and prescribed burning. If you look at the science of prescribed burning, you can actually store 25% more carbon with frequent low intensity prescribed fires because you're creating charcoal. And that charcoal is really stable, more stable than those brush piles.
Okay.
And so with a regime of frequent low intensity prescribed fire, like indigenous burning, there was more carbon getting stored in the soil than what we're seeing right now. And I could only fathom how much carbon these fires released right now, and especially because they're burning soil.
Yeah.
And when we lose soil, that's where the carbon is. The above ground carbon is very transitory. It comes and goes pretty quickly. The below ground carbon is where, that is what we need to protect. The Greenwood fire, we lost feet, like 3 feet plus of soil throughout that whole 27,000 acres. And there was so much carbon there. I think we argue a lot about the above ground carbon. That's really not where the math is. The math is like, what are we storing in the soil? And if we can protect that soil from catastrophic wildfire, that's where we're going to be successful in the longer run.
Boreal forest is the best carbon sink.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Does chipping fit in here anywhere?
It does. I think it just cycles it. It's above ground. I got that's much.
I'm gonna go positive.
I would prefer that carbon Eve. Like for one, it doesn't really allow the soil to work. It's like a barrier to forbs and stuff growing, and then if a fire establishes in wood chips, it's like impossible to put out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Takes a huge amount of nitrogen added to those chips to create a growing medium.
It really changes the chemistry. Yeah. Austin Van Scoy, though, I'll just say for him, he loves wood chips.
Yeah.
So,
He loves understory because it keeps soil or moisture in the big tree.
yeah. So
Forrester came out about our grant. We had suggested that overburning in winter. So we had chipping done.
yeah, I mean there's pros and cons to all of that, but
Question there.
So switching to a different topic, just to insert into the conversation about resiliency. I recently read an article in Yes Magazine about the needs after a catastrophic wildfire in the Pacific Northwest for mental health services. And we haven't talked about that here, but that's another piece that is an extremely important one in terms of building the network. Because people who have suffered loss have issues trying to cope with that. And so just to state it so that it's, you know, kind of in the room, that it's an important part of the network and aspect.
Yeah, and I can talk to that a little bit. So part of the other reason of us going to the State Theater is like, we wanted a space where people could come in and just express themselves. And we got a lot of that, you know, like people either just like overwhelmed or grieving the wilderness or just uncertain, didn't know what to do with their energy. I mean, that was even me like on Tuesday before we got even talked to Aaron. I was just like scrolling maps and just aggressively breaking leaves that I didn't really know was helping, or like trying to figure out where to put my like sprinklers, and was just like in this manic state of like, I have to do something. Like I just can't sit here. I can't do my regular job. And so I'm the kind of person who I like have to take action, but that's also like not a lot of people in my life. Like there's a lot of friends I've talked to who had to just like be home and like sit with those emotions. I mean, even Lacey Squire on her Boundary Waters Connection or the Wilderness Edge podcast had an episode about it with M. Baxley. They kind of talked about that grief and like feeling your feelings in these big moments. So I do think that there is a place and more of a need to, or more of a place to fill that need. I'm not a mental health professional, so I wasn't going to be like, and come talk to me about other problems. But like, if someone didn't want to talk, if they came into the State Theater, I was ready to listen. I was ready to sit down and let them feel heard or let them express themselves. But that was something that I noticed at a larger scale, is that I think 50% of the people who walked into the theater just needed someone to talk to. So, and that was at least something we could provide in some capacity. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious to that end, like the community care team is a huge resource for physical and mental health in this community.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different entities involved in that group, including like the high school, the college, churches, ECR, and then all of the professionals in that area. And they share that expertise in how to work with people. And they were a big player when we had the COVID thing in the community. So I'm kind of wondering, as you're looking at your collection of resources, are they part of that at all?
Yeah, I think maybe Emily was having more direct conversation. We all kind of had like our nonprofits that we were calling and trying to be like, how can we support you?
Yeah.
Like, can we direct people to you? Can we direct money to you? Like, what do you need right now? So they were like in our list of like, either we were directing people there or like seeing if they needed support, or if they had people in their network that needed support that we could fill a need on. So we did that with a variety of nonprofits and sent out emails, people being like, hey, if anyone in your membership or whatever just like needs an air purifier, just needs emotional support, whatever, like we were able to like either find the right person for that or be able to help ourselves or help them ourselves. Yeah.
What was really, I thought, cool on your setting this up, there's several location. Your presence was there.
Yeah.
For the community, for all of us. And, you know, and I had concerns, talked to my neighbors, they had concerns. No one else was there. And there are established health agencies and stuff and care places that you referred people to. But there was a physical place, you saw it, you knew it, you felt it, and you guys were there. It was just really beautiful seeing that. And not only that, that you were there, you had the posters throughout, your timing, you were open Saturdays and Sundays, you were there. And then radio covered those speeches and presentations that the Ely Community Response set up in City Hall and elsewhere. So you had the radio going, you had Facebook, and you had Substack. All those things that, like I say, was out in community to me and others that didn't have those other channels. And I could see that, or I saw that when I went in, that there were people who came who wouldn't have gone to any other place. And so thank you for that, really, seriously.
And
it's a few minutes after 5. I think we should wrap this up, and I want to thank you all. And man, it's just so complicated.
Yeah,
There's
it's
a lot.
really dynamic.
What-
It involves.
What do you do next? And who leads it and who does it? Is a big question, and I don't have any idea what the answer is, but we have to keep trying to pick up on what you've been doing.
I will say the one thing that helps on an individual level is just like think through what your plan is, or like how you would respond, or like just be aware of what the possibilities are. Because even when I was renovating my house, I was like, everything's replaceable except for these items, and then I left and I was like, and I didn't grab my toothbrush. And so I like scurried back. But it's like, yeah, just like have your lists in place, have your plans in place, have like your evacuation buddy if that's someone you need. So if you live out of town and you're like, hey, I can call up this person, I know I can stay there because they have AC or whatever. So that's my plea to everyone on an individual level. It's just like be ready to be ready. You don't even have to be like concerned, or just like think through scenarios and just have your backups in place. And if, I mean, God forbid the grid goes down, you can't call your buddy. Like, who can you go to in a different area of the region that you could just be like, this is our check-in point or whatever, you know, like just, I mean, even the other day, the power went out and I think the T-Mobile tower went down and I was like, okay, I don't have power and I can't call anyone on my phone. I'm gonna go into town in my office and see if anyone's there. And there was. So I was like, okay, and there's Wi-Fi in town. Good. So like just even having stuff like that's really helpful. Well, because you just never know what could happen.
Well, big thanks to all of you.
Yeah.
For coming.
Yeah.